It is May 27th, and this is going to air on May 31st. That's a Friday. And today, on the live reading, we are going to be reading Chapter 3 from my book Double Blind, which is actually my first novel. And I've read the first two chapters, about 65% of the first two chapters, and they're available on Substack. Will I be reading the chapter in its entirety? Well, no, because I want you to buy the book. But I will be reading a little bit from the third chapter and kind of going over a little bit of the story before we start. And afterwards, I'll do some shameless self-promotion. So, thus far in Double Blind, the first two chapters, a character named Sam has been introduced, a character named Marcia has been introduced, and a character named Sandra may have met her early demise. So basically, there's a laboratory, we know some sort of an experiment, and then there's also a captain who's trying to kind of keep wraps under what's going on because there has been a breakout of a, whatchamacallit, particular subject known as Private Henry. There you go. I forgot my characters' names. And so Chapter 3 kind of picks up where the end of the meeting left off in Chapter 2, which actually I did not read about, read live, I should say, because I want you to buy the book. But so basically, they've had their meeting. They talked about Private Henry having broken out of the laboratory, and essentially they need to contain the situation. So I'm going to go ahead and start Chapter 3. Hopefully I don't bore you too much. Chapter 3. Sam walked alongside Captain Davis as they exited the Dex building. Dex is the laboratory. He held the door open for the senior officer, and the captain thanked him. "Do you have any worries about the operation?" Davis asked. Sam shook his head. "Not especially." Their previous tension remained. They crossed the parking lot as Sam reached into his trouser pocket for his keys. He'd driven a rented white Prius to the lab, and the captain was in an Army-issue Hyundai parked a few cars from his. "I know you don't want Marcia tagging along," Davis said. Sam shook his head. "That's not my style, but still, I'm sure I can achieve directives within 72 hours. I'm just concerned about being a babysitter." Davis let out a small chuckle. "Indeed. When I first read the orders, my feelings were mutual, but this is an important mission, Sam." Sam stopped at the driver's side of the Prius and used the key fob to unlock the door. He looked toward the road leading to the lab as a single flatbed truck approached, slowly turning towards the back of the building. The driver didn't look towards them. "Important as every other cover-up," Sam said. The captain laughed aloud and removed his keys from his jacket pocket. "We all know how you feel about doing work for the military, Sam," he said. "But the fact is this operation is very important, and you are the best of what we need. It would be irresponsible to let old feeling cause a lapse in national security." Captain Davis recalled the conversation many years ago in the court when General Arias made the caution very clear. "Let's hope the safeguards you're considering will perform well," the general had said, "when the risk has become greater and the consequences reach further than your own ass." Sam opened his car door and sat down. "I'll pick up the doctor in 1 hour, as discussed," he said. "All other elements will remain. I'm not trying to be difficult, but my reasons for the timeline are important to me." "You know, Sam," the captain started, "the experiment outcomes hit I know the experiment outcomes hit close to home." Wow, tongue-tied. "A great deal might change after this medical technology is harnessed. The potential goes far beyond military application." Sam looked at him dead in the eye, holding his breath as he avoided taking the bait. "This could help that little girl, Sam," Davis added. "Right," Sam said. "I'm not excited that you know." He shut the door and began driving away. Sam took a deep breath as he thought about that terrible day. He received a text message from one of his ex-girlfriend's cousins who informed him about the accident. He remembered putting his hand on his forehead and being unable to feel his face. He never felt so helpless. There was nothing he could do. "I'll be at the hospital soon," Sam had texted back. "See if there's any way I can help." "That's why I'm messaging you," the cousin replied. The family wants you to stay away." Near the community college. Private Henry was sitting at the bus stop, looking down at a pair of shoes he couldn't remember putting on or lacing up. He hadn't visited a store in months, which he knew only because he'd been at the labs for as long as his short-term memory could recall. "The hell did these come from?" he thought. He cringed as a competing voice filled his head. "We need subjects," the voice boomed. "Subjects for proof." Henry wasn't a particularly large person, but after being in the lab for several weeks, his body recovered very quickly and in ways he'd never seen. Henry hated every minute of physical training in the Army, but in the past several months, his muscles began to look like pictures from bodybuilders in the magazines. It was the only way he could describe it. Henry ran his hands down his short brown hair, feeling the scar on his head where they'd stitch him up from after the surgery, piecing his skull back together. He couldn't remember the moment he'd been injured. The days and weeks following were a blur. He could only truly remember his time on the operating table. For some reason, the image of being surrounded by doctors and nurses seemed to flood his mind's eye with alarming frequency, whether he liked it or not. He looked up toward the street and sensed someone walking in his directions. She was a young woman, probably a student attending the community college nearby. Henry looked away for a moment, wondering if she was even real to begin with. He'd seen a few things that were falling in and out of his view for several days, as memories seemed to materialize from thin air. It felt strange, like a bridge between what he could remember and what he could see. He hated feeling that way, like the world he knew didn't make any sense. He hadn't been able to organize his thoughts for a while, and it felt like he was tearing him apart. It became painful whenever he attempted to use his memories to get a grip. He wasn't sure how much more he could take. "Move," the voice told him. "Move now." Henry looked back at the young woman. She had long blonde hair flowing past her shoulders, which she kept covered with a green beanie and the kind you see someone wearing in a ski lodge. He smiled awkwardly. The young lady hurried away and put her hands in her jacket pockets. She noticed him staring back at her, his wrinkled clothes, his hair unkempt. His awkward smile gave her a sense of trepidation. She managed a half smile and watched as he leaned back into the bench at the bus stop. Henry kept watching as she hurried past him, maintaining distance as her head remained down. He looked away, quietly chuckling as he raised his hand over his forehead. Something returned to his mind's eye, the memory of another time and place where simply looking at a woman without permission could get an outsider into big trouble. He twitched in his seat, yearning for the memory to disappear forever. Do that again. He twitched in his seat, yearning for the memory to disappear forever. Henry breathed deep, gasping for reprieve as he moved his hand over his eyes. The young lady sped up as she turned the corner, only a few meters from the bus stop. She increased her pace, quickly looking back. She noticed the bench was now empty. So one part I'm not going to read is when Marcia and Sam, who had met in the lab previous to the start of Chapter 3, they go out to lunch. They talk a little bit about the case and everything and the mission, if you will. And essentially they have to find Private Henry amongst, or where he is in the city because he's escaped, he's hiding, and he's checking out young college girls. And so the part where they're talking about each other, I'm probably not going to read, just going to skip over that. And I'll jump to the call that Sam and Marcia intercept for, basically a murder near the college campus or whatever. And so this introduces another important character, Sheriff Collins, who of course is going over the incident. And so we're going to pick up there. An hour later, Sheriff Collins was sitting in a Suburban, halfway through the myriad of paperwork that had to be completed when there was any homicide. 5 times as much when it came to recovering 5 bodies. He didn't like resting his plastic clipboard atop his ever-swelling beer gut, but it proved useful. Collins' radio crackled, and one of his deputies requested him. Collins reached for the radio in his passenger seat and clicked the receiver button. 10-4, he responded. "On my way." He finished scribbling his sentence, then placed the clipboard down on the center console and opened the driver's side door, stepping out with a groan as he watched 2 more patrol cars arrive. The old sheriff waved to the officers in the cars. He raised a single finger and pointed to the other side of the street, just across from the crime scene. Several other officers were outlining the area with perimeter tape. It was a signal for them to assist. Collins walked toward the house, which was old, even for his neighborhood near the campus. The dark green trim was outdated, and the landscaping wasn't well kept, which didn't matter as most of the homes in the block were student rentals. The community college was less than a quarter mile away. He often forgot the name of the campus, not that it mattered. He approached the front door, which had been forced open during the attack. A tall, well-built man stood in the porch next to a younger, much smaller woman with medium-length brunette hair tied into a ponytail. They stood out like sore thumbs. "Can I help you?" Collins asked the two. He watched as the man presented a military special operations badge, which Collins had only seen in Homeland Security briefings. "Sam Euling," the man said, "and this is Dr. Marcia Benedict from a local laboratory. We've been informed about the situation and must be present for observations." Collins asked for the badge, appreciating Sam's cordial demeanor while hating the idea of federal action. They were never forthcoming and took command of everything. Collins hated that. Sam handed him the badge. "You mind if I confirm?" he asked. Sam shook his head. "Not at all." Collins pulled a small notepad from his shirt pocket and jotted down the badge number. He handed it to one of his deputies. The officer walked away, presumably to his car, to radio dispatch. Collins returned the badge, and Sam reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a letter. He handed it to Collins. "It's from the Attorney General," Sam declared. Collins took the letter and began reading. "When did you hear about this investigation?" he asked. "It was reported about an hour ago, right, Sheriff?" Sam confirmed. Collins nodded. "It was. And that doesn't answer my question. It makes a small-town law enforcement officer very damn nervous when the feds begin assigning agents to any investigation, especially one as violent as this." "I can appreciate that, sir," Sam said. "Our observation is akin to an active federal investigation. We need to take a look at the crime scene and the deceased as soon as possible." The sheriff gave them a disapproving look and motioned for them to follow him. Many years before, he'd worked for the Los Angeles Police Department and seen his fair share of violent crimes. Collins longed for the old ways when the feds were called in by local law and not vice versa. They all entered the front door, and Collins ensured they avoided the areas taped off and outlined for the pending investigation. He looked toward Marcia, whose pretty face turned white as she noticed the living room just past the entryway. He knew she was feeling queasy. "What's your name again?" he asked. She responded with a noise that almost sounded like a sob. "Your name again, miss?" Collins repeated. "Marcia," she finally said. "I take that as your first time around a violent crime scene." She nodded. Yes, it is. Regretting the lunch I just ate." I think I'll stop there because it gets a little bit exuberant moving forward. So, not that that's a bad thing, but me reading it, it kind of just adds to the, I don't know, the kind of the grim nature of describing a crime scene or whatever. So, that is about midway through chapter 3, and it's setting the stage with all the characters, kind of what's happening, a violent, whatchamacallit, plot point, all those different things. So hopefully you enjoyed it. I will be doing another live reading or some sort of a live event. Actually, the book I'm going over right now is a children's book on diabetes, and it's really, really well done. So there'll be a picture right there. You can check out the cover for it. And that one, I don't know how much I'm going to read because it's a very short read, being a children's book. So, of course, I don't want to give it all away, but it's an incredibly important topic. So I will be doing a video on that later this week, and that will be coming to you guys soon. If you have any suggestions on what I can do a live read on, leave it in the comments. And once again, thank you for joining me. It's been awesome. If you made it this far,